Lens filters and lens filtration is something that I've wanted to try for a little while now, but I haven't really known which filters I want to use and which ones I should buy, and they're quite expensive. So recently when I was looking through filters online, scrolling through, I saw a photo of the actual filter and I thought, hey, how hard would that be to try at home? So I've ordered a couple of these little cheap UV filters off eBay. I think they cost about $10 or so. And I wanted to just try making a few effects of my own with stuff I can find around the house and see what I can create. I've actually only ordered 2 filters, so what I'm going to do is actually test a few things on this glass here. I found this little box that I had laying around. It's got a bit of glass area to try. And I'm going to try a few things like abrasive cleaners and scourers, as well as marking it with things that I can remove like textures and Vaseline and different things like that. And another little thing I wanted to try was recently I tiled my kitchen, put up some nice tiles, and there was a screw in the wall that I had to remove in order to put the cabinets back on the wall. Got the angle grinder out and it flicked all its metal shavings onto the tiles, which sort of scratched the surface. I thought that could be something fun to try. As long as it's done safely, we should be able to scratch the front of the glass and possibly get an interesting effect. It could all come undone, it could shatter the glass, it could do all sorts of things, and it might not look any good, but I figured it would be worth a try. The main effect that I'm hoping to recreate is that kind of black pro mist kind of look where it blows out the highlights and gives a little bloom. And when I've looked at these online, I've noticed that they're generally just a textured filter, which I presume allows the light to bounce around on the front of the glass, which causes that halation around the highlights. So I figure if I can create some kind of haze or diffusion on the front of the filter, that might give a similar effect. All right, so I'm set up for my little test run of everything. I've got all my different things I want to try out on this glass first. So let's start out with something like a highlighter. So I'm just going to color in a little bit here. The main thing I'm wanting to test at the moment with these is just how easily they'll wipe off. So there's a few highlighter lines. Also got some China markers. So next up we've got some deodorant and some dry shampoo just to see how they sit on the surface. So if we're really gentle with the deodorant, we can get a really fine coating. Definitely wouldn't want to be spraying this straight onto a lens. Don't know what's in there. But on these kind of filters, I'm pretty happy to give it a go. If we're really light with that, that might work for a real gentle effect and we can sort of change the intensity as needed. This dry shampoo should be interesting. A similar sort of effect, a little bit more powdery. Didn't have any Vaseline around the house, but I've got this lovely eucalyptus chest rub ointment, which I'm sure expired a little while ago. It expires in January 2018, so that's something. I'm just going to smear a little bit on here, and this is going to be that classic kind of proverbial Vaseline on the lens effect that everyone seems to know about, but I'm not sure if anyone actually has tried. So a lot of these seem like they're going to be quite easy to remove, which is good, because it allows us to try a few different things without needing to buy a bunch of filters and waste a lot of money for not much. All right, time for some destructive effects. So just a green scourer from the kitchen. And what it's doing, rubbing quite hard, is not as much as I would have thought. Definitely tend not to use these on glass. So got my trusty Colgate Total 12 Whole Mouth Health toothpaste. See what that is? Toothpastes are a kind of abrasive, so try it with the scourer. Wipe that off. And a bit like the scourer on its own, it hasn't really done much. Next thing I want to try is some Jif, some abrasive cleaner. So hopefully this does do a little bit more than the toothpaste. It has a nice sound to it. Real scratchy. And in classic Jif fashion, it's going to take a while to get off. And surprisingly, it looks like it's done very little damage, except to my ears, which really don't like the sound. All right, we've got to go up to the big guns now. I'm going to start off with some P400 sandpaper. Just sort of gently rub that. So that's definitely doing a little bit more. All right, now for the big guns, the P60 sandpaper. So I've gone from quite fine to quite coarse. This is definitely giving us more of a liney kind of effect. Wonder how useful that will be, but could create some nice streaks in more of a straight line kind of way. There's definitely pronounced lines in here, so I'd need to be pretty careful about where I was rubbing, more so than with the 400 grit sandpaper, which I think will create more of a haze effect, whereas the coarser sandpaper, I reckon we could do some streak sort of effects with. Next up is the blade. Going to see what happens if I just score along. So I can definitely put some scratches in it, but don't know that they're going to be very interesting scratches. But they might just be enough to create some streak effects. So I'm interested to see if I can do anything with this. I think I'd rather use the blade than the coarse sandpaper because I've got a little bit more control over it. So here's a few of the effects. We've got the coarse sandpaper here. We've got the fine sandpaper here, which you probably can't see, but it's just hazed it up just a little bit. Got my attempts at Jif and toothpaste and scouring here, which hasn't really taken us very far. And I've got my Vaseline over here. Here we have our dry shampoo, which is a very much a dusty kind of effect. So I'm not sure that's what I'd go for, but the deodorants actually worked pretty well. That's the thicker sort of part. And it is sort of like a really fine dust. So we can be really careful and get a really fine coating on the filter and see how that looks, as well as a thicker one just to see what we can make of that. And here we have our different lines from the highlighters and the China markers and the gel highlighter. So I'll give a go of wiping those off now. Definitely wouldn't use Windex on the lenses themselves. Got some Pancro cleaner that would be better for that. And with a little bit of a wipe, they've all come off. So I don't have any reservations towards using my cheap filters with some markers to try and see what color effects I can get from those. So that's great. And with our Vaseline, not a problem there. And of course, no issue wiping off the deodorant and the hairspray. Now, while a lot of these things wipe off quite easily, I'm sure they're doing chemical damage to the glass and changing it slightly. So I absolutely would not be doing this to the front element of my lens because who knows what it could do, especially with the coatings that lenses have, because this glass wouldn't necessarily be coated, whereas lenses are. And so these chemicals could do all sorts of things to those coatings. So definitely keep that in mind and don't ever do any of these things to the front of a lens unless you're willing to throw it out. So definitely willing to do it with these filters that have cost me basically nothing. Would not even use a expensive UV filter with these effects because it's just too risky. And that's even more the case with the sandpaper that we've tried out. It is not a good way to go. Don't do it to the front of an expensive lens. I don't need to tell you that, but I do because I don't want any of you coming back to me and saying that I told you to put sandpaper on the front of your lens. Don't do it. So the next thing I want to try is the angle grinder. I'm going to take this outside and see what I can find to grind, and the metal filings coming off that will hopefully leave some indents in the glass, and we might be able to achieve some kind of effect with that. It's going to be interesting. So let's see how we go with that. Here I have the results, and yeah, it's not really going to have the effect I want it to. The problem is that you end up with the little bits of metal shavings actually lodged into the glass. Could be interesting, but I don't think it's worth wasting one of these filters for when I've only got the two to try. So I'm going to give that a miss for today. But I'm sure there would be a way to make an interesting effect out of that. But we've tried something interesting. Maybe it didn't work, but we had some fun along the way. All right, so the time's come to go into production on my new series of filters. I think it's going to be a lot more fun if we try and give each of these a name so that we can keep track of which is which. So the effects that I want to put into production are the colored lines over the filter and maybe coloring in sections of the filter. And I also want to give the good old Vaseline on the lens a go and our deodorant. So they're all ones that we can do without damaging the lens. And then I want to move up to our blade and cutting some fine lines into the front of the filter. And I also want to try out our fine grit sandpaper and see what sort of effect that creates. We didn't actually test it, but I've also found a blue marker because I think that blue might be an interesting color to use on the front of the lens, and maybe even a red one. We'll do the blue streaker. We'll also create a red streaker. I think that these highlighters we can try out as more of a generalized color effect. So we might just call that a fluoro haze. Hopefully that just creates a little bit of a colorful effect in certain parts of the lens. We'll call that fluoro haze M/G for magenta or green. And then we'll move up to our chest rub ointment. Call that the chesty glow. We'll also have our deodorant, which I have a feeling this is going to work really well. So I'm going to give this the name of Black Foam Mist, and we'll do that in a quarter and a full strength so that we can see the different levels of effect. And then we're going to get into our blade. We'll call that a $10 scratchy. Don't know if they're called scratchies everywhere, but we call them scratchies, like the lotto things that you scratch with a coin. Don't know if they could have another name. If they have a different name, let me know. $10 scratchy. Usually you'd get like a $1 one or a $2 one, but we've got a $10 filter, so it's a $10 scratchy. And then the last effect will be our fine grit sandpaper. The P400 actually, I think that works as a name. Plus, let's do that. The P400 Plus filter. Sounds absolutely legit. So I've got what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 filters we're going to give a go. And there's a few variations in there too. So I'm going to start production and then we'll go test them out. So to start out with, we're just going to have a look at the control scene. So this is the scene that we're going to use in all of the shots of all the different filters. And this is without any filter in front. So you can see we've got a bit of a light source coming from the top and a few little reflections and a few different surfaces and stuff just so that we can see things. I would have liked to have done some more tests in different environments, but we've just mainly stuck to these for this round. First up, we have the blue streaker filter. So I started out with some fairly fine lines, and you can see as I move the filter around, the streak on the light moves around a little bit. So there's definitely a bit of a blue haze coming from the blue streaker filter, and compared to the control, you can see how much that's changed. Next up, I tried out the red streaker filter. And you can see that there's quite a bit of colour being added in these test shots. We've got that same streak effect coming from the light again. I quite like this effect, and it adds quite a vintagey kind of look. It looks like a filter that's sort of deteriorated over the years, or a lens that's got a coating which is warmed up, which I quite like, and I could imagine using this in a few different scenarios. I think that because I did a line across closer to the centre of the filter, the colour really shines through in this one. So it's an interesting effect again, and just like all these texture effects, it's quite easy to clean off. So it's something that you can just play with in different situations and see how it looks and adjust it as needed. Next up, we have our magenta and green fluoro haze filters with our fluoro highlighters. With these, I started out with just the clean edges, and then I ended up smudging it a little bit to achieve different looks. And especially with that smudged effect, they look very stylized, and you could achieve some interesting looks in different scenarios here. So just like the red and blue streakers, there's something which I can have a marker with me and see if I want to add that effect. But for something like a dream sequence, or something that's supposed to feel a little bit disturbing perhaps, or something like a music video where there's just a little bit of visual interest wanted, it's something that I could definitely consider for that. Next up, we've got our chesty glow effect, which is our version of the Vaseline on the lens, and the results are pretty well expected. Depending on where you put the Vaseline, it changes which areas of the image are out of focus or blurry, and it's something which you can try out in different ways to achieve interesting frames. So here we have our black foam mist filter, which it's a little bit of an organic look, and it's hard to control exactly how strong the effect is. So it's something that I had to retry a few times. But starting out, we have our stronger look, and then we have our slightly lighter effect. And I'm really happy with how this has turned out. It's a filter that I can imagine using in a lot of situations. It is adding the little bit of halation around the light, which I quite like, and just adding a lower contrast look to the image and a little bit of visual interest. So this is something that I'd definitely consider using in a few different situations, and it has a good look to it. I think that a proper Black Pro Mist filter is going to look better than this, but for a bit of spray-on deodorant and a $10 filter, I'm very happy with the results. Next up, we've got the $10 Scratchy, which is our scratches along the front of the surface of the lens. And this hasn't done all that much. There's a bit of a starlight effect coming from the light, which is nice, but it's not an effect I can see myself using very often. And lastly, we have our P400 Plus, which I've just used the same filter as we used in the $10 Scratchy, and I've just added the sandpaper on top of it. And this is quite a strong look. It definitely adds a lot of diffusion to the glass. There's a lot of blooming and all of that. So it's an effect that if it was done probably a little bit lighter than this, it could be a more permanent option than the deodorant in our Black Faux Mist filter, achieving a fairly similar look, but you definitely want to go a bit lighter than this for most situations. I don't think this is such a bad filter to have now that I've made it. I can't really go back. So I'll consider using this in different situations, but generally I think it's a little bit strong for me and it's not quite the look I would want to go for, but you never know when it might come in handy. All in all, I'm pretty happy with these filters and effects. I think that especially the ones that are removable and changeable, like the markers and our deodorant for our Black Faux Mist, are all things that I can imagine using in lots of different situations, and the fact that I can just use them when I need to and change them as needed is really great because it makes them really flexible and I don't need to commit or spend lots of money to achieve the looks. And even if I don't use them often, it's not like I'm wasting lots of energy in making something or lots of money in an effect that I won't use very often. Today's video has been a little bit different. We've been on a little bit of a journey of DIY filters. We've had some fun along the way, so I hope you've enjoyed watching along. If you have any questions at all about what I've created here or anything else, let me know in the comments down below, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.